The gunshot cracked like thunder across the dusty main street of Redemption Springs, but Yates Quinn didn't flinch. His weathered face remained impassive as he stood outside the auction block, counting the bills in his leather wallet, while townsfolk gathered to gawk at his latest decision, one they were already calling his greatest folly. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild enough that a man's business should have remained his own. But in a town where everyone knew your name before sundown on your first day, privacy was as rare as rain in July. $500 for that. Bartholomew Jenkins spat tobacco juice into the dirt, narrowly missing Yates' polished boots. Quinn's finally lost his mind, paying good money for a mail-order bride that came in looking like something the coyotes dragged in. Laughter rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The woman standing on the auction block kept her eyes fixed on the dusty boards beneath her bare feet, her dress, if it could still be called that, hung in tattered rags around her thin frame. Dirt streaked her face, and her hair fell in matted tangles down her back. She'd arrived on the morning stage, part of a group of mail-order brides, but unlike the others with their neat dresses and hopeful smiles, she looked as though she'd traveled through hell to get here. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel and ethics to match, had been about to send her back east when Yates stepped forward with his offer. "You're making a mistake, Quinn," called out Frank Miller from the barbershop doorway. "Even you can't polish that rock into a diamond." Yates finished counting his money and handed it to the auctioneer. His blue eyes finally lifted to meet the curious, defiant gaze of the woman. Despite her condition, there was a fire there that intrigued him. "Papers," he said quietly, extending his hand to the auctioneer. The man shuffled through his documents and produced a marriage contract, already bearing the woman's signature. Olivia Cole. Yates signed his name with deliberate strokes, then folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. Only then did he address the mocking crowd that had gathered to witness his apparent humiliation. "You folks enjoy your laugh," he said, his voice carrying despite its softness. "Watch her become my queen." With those words, he extended his hand to Olivia. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her trembling fingers in his palm and stepped down from the platform. "Can she even speak English?" someone called out. Olivia's spine straightened. "Better than you, I'd wager," she replied, her voice clear and cultured despite her appearance. This unexpected retort silenced the crowd momentarily before triggering another wave of laughter. Yates' mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile as he led her toward his wagon at the end of the street. "You didn't have to do that," Olivia murmured as they walked. "Buy me, I mean." "I didn't buy you," he replied. "I paid for the contract. There's a difference. Not to them." She nodded toward the townspeople still watching their progress. "Their opinions matter about as much as a snowflake in August," Yates said, helping her onto the wagon seat before climbing up himself. "My ranch is about 10 miles outside town. It's not much, but it's peaceful." As he snapped the reins and the horses pulled away from Redemption Springs, Olivia clutched the seat with white-knuckled fingers. "Mr. Quinn, Yates," she corrected. "I feel I should tell you I'm not what you're expecting." He glanced at her, taking in her ragged appearance and the wariness in her eyes. "I'm not expecting anything, Miss Cole. Please call me Olivia." She took a deep breath. "And you should know I didn't come here to be anyone's wife." "Not really. I came west because I had to leave Boston rather suddenly. Running from something," her lips pressed into a thin line. "Someone." Yates nodded but didn't press. The vast landscape of Wyoming territory stretched before them, golden in the afternoon sun. "Well, whatever you're running from, it's a long way from here." They rode in silence for several minutes before Olivia spoke again. "What did you mean back there? About making me your queen?" A faint smile crossed Yates' face. "Just giving them something to chew on besides their own bitterness." "But why did you really pay for my contract? I'm clearly not what any man would want in a bride." Yates kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Let's get one thing straight. I don't own you. That paper doesn't make you my property. It's protection for both of us. Out here, a woman alone is vulnerable in ways you can't imagine, and a man," he paused, "a man needs certain appearances maintained if he wants to do business. So this is a business arrangement, if that's what you want to call it." The wagon bumped along the rutted trail, and Olivia studied Yates' profile against the vast Wyoming sky. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, jaw too square, eyes too serious. But there was something compelling in the quiet strength he exuded. "I don't know the first thing about being a rancher's wife," she admitted, "and I don't know the first thing about being anybody's husband," he countered. "We'll figure it out as we go." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the landscape in fiery gold, the wagon crested a hill. Below them spread a valley where a modest ranch house stood, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. A creek wound through the property like a silver ribbon, and cattle dotted the grassland beyond. "This is Quinn's Crossing," Yates said with quiet pride. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine. Every inch paid for with my own sweat." "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, and meant it. As they approached the house, a man emerged from one of the outbuildings, tall and lanky, with a shock of ginger hair beneath his hat. "That's Isaac," Yates explained. "My foreman, only full-time help I've got, though I bring on hands during roundup and branding." Isaac's eyes widened as he took in Olivia's bedraggled appearance, but to his credit, he touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, boss." "Isaac, this is Miss Olivia Cole, my wife." Isaac's surprise was evident, but he recovered quickly. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Quinn." Olivia hesitated before responding. "Likewise, Mr. Isaac." "Just Isaac, madam." Yates jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Olivia, his hands firm but gentle at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. She swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Isaac, could you see to the horses?" Yates asked. "I'll get Mrs. Quinn settled." "Of course, boss." The foreman led the team away, casting curious glances over his shoulder. Yates guided Olivia toward the house, steadying her when she stumbled on the porch steps. "You're dead on your feet," he observed. "I haven't slept properly in days," she admitted. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly neat and comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace and solid furniture opened onto a kitchen. A short hallway presumably led to bedrooms. "It's not fancy," Yates said, watching her take it in, "but it's solid." "It's lovely," Olivia said, and again she meant it. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the simple orderliness of the place felt like sanctuary. "You'll want to clean up. There's a room you can use." He gestured down the hall. "Last door on the right, I'll heat water for a bath." Olivia nodded gratefully, but as she turned toward the hallway, her knees buckled. Yates caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her up as though she weighed nothing. "When did you last eat?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Yesterday, maybe the day before." The days had blurred together in her flight from Boston. Cursing under his breath, Yates carried her to a bedroom and set her gently on the bed. "Rest here, I'll bring you something." The bed was soft, the quilts clean and fresh. Olivia meant to stay awake, to maintain her guard in this strange place with this stranger who had inexplicably tied his fate to hers. But exhaustion claimed her before Yates even left the room. When she woke, the quality of light through the window had changed. Late afternoon had given way to dusk. On the bedside table, she found a plate with bread, cheese, and sliced apple, alongside a cup of water. Beside these sat a folded nightgown and a note in a strong, clear hand. "Bath ready in the kitchen when you're able." Why the simple kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She ate slowly, savoring each bite before gathering the nightgown and making her way to the kitchen. True to his word, Yates had prepared a bath behind a screen in the warm kitchen. A bar of soap and a towel waited on a stool, along with a comb for her tangled hair. "I'll be out with Isaac checking the north pasture," came Yates' voice from the doorway behind her. "Take your time, make yourself at home." "Thank you," she said, turning to face him. In the fading light, his features seemed softer. "For all of this." "I don't understand why you're being so kind, but I'm grateful." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what needs doing." After he left, Olivia sank into the warm water with a sigh that came from the depths of her soul. As she scrubbed away weeks of grime and fear, she wondered what twist of fate had brought her to this place, to this man. And whether she dared hope she'd found a safe harbor at last. In the days that followed, Olivia began to find her footing at Quinn's Crossing. She discovered that while the house was neat, it lacked the touch of someone who truly made it a home. Sheets were clean but mended clumsily. Meals were functional but basic. The curtains hung crookedly, apparently put up by hands more accustomed to roping cattle than draping fabric. These were problems she could solve. While her upbringing in Boston hadn't prepared her for ranch life, she did know how to run a household. Each morning, after Yates rode out with Isaac, she tackled one area of the house, bringing order and comfort where before there had been only practicality. Yates noticed, though he said little. But she caught the appreciative glance when he saw fresh wildflowers on the table, the way his fingers lingered on the properly hemmed curtains, how he took second helpings of meals she prepared. They were like two people performing an elaborate dance, careful not to step too close or reveal too much. Yates never pressed her about her past, and she didn't ask about his. At night, he slept in a small room off the kitchen, insisting she take the main bedroom. After a week, Olivia ventured to the general store in Redemption Springs. Yates had given her money for whatever you need, he'd said, and a list of supplies for the ranch. The whispers started the moment she stepped through the door, conversations faltering then resuming in hushed tones. She held her head high. Her simple dress, one of 3 she'd sewn from fabric Yates, had brought her a vast improvement over the rags she'd arrived in. Her hair, now clean and properly styled, was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet. "Well, look who's here," drawled a woman examining bolts of fabric. "Quinn's ragamuffin bride." Olivia recognized her as the banker's wife, Mrs. Whitfield, who had been among the loudest mockers on the day of the auction. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," Olivia replied pleasantly. "Lovely day, isn't it?" The woman's eyes narrowed at Olivia's cultured accent. "Indeed, you clean up better than expected, though I suppose anyone would after the state you arrived in." "Thank you for your concern," Olivia said, moving toward the counter where Mr. Peterson, the storekeeper, waited with barely concealed curiosity. "I'll need these items, please, Mr. Peterson, and if you have any fresh eggs, I'd appreciate a dozen." As Peterson filled her order, other women in the store edged closer, their curiosity palpable. "We heard Quinn bought you sight unseen," ventured one, a freckled woman about Olivia's age. "That he thought he was getting a proper Boston lady." Olivia met her gaze steadily. "Mr. Quinn knew exactly what he was getting, miss. Harriet Mills, my father owns the livery, Miss Mills, and I can assure you Mr. Quinn is quite satisfied with our arrangement. How would a fine Eastern lady like yourself end up coming west as a mail-order bride, Mrs. Whitfield persisted. In such a state, no less. Olivia counted out money for her purchases. "Life takes unexpected turns, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm sure even you can appreciate that." Before the woman could respond, the store door opened and Yates stepped in. His eyes found Olivia immediately, a question in them. She gave him a small smile of reassurance. "Ladies," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Quinn, are you about done? We should head back before the heat of the day." The use of her married name sent a strange flutter through Olivia's chest. "Yes, just finishing up." As Yates gathered her packages, she heard Mrs. Whitfield mutter to her companion, "She may look better, but mark my words, you can't make a silk purse from a sow's ear." Outside, Yates loaded her purchases into the wagon. Everything all right in there, looked like the local gossip brigade was in full session. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Olivia assured him, "though they're certainly curious about us. Small towns run on curiosity and coffee." He helped her onto the seat. "Did they give you much trouble? Just the usual speculation about how someone like me ended up with someone like you." His hands stilled on the reins. "Someone like me, a successful rancher," she clarified. "They seem to think I tricked you somehow." Yates snorted. "Shows what they know. Nobody tricks Yates Quinn." As they drove back to the ranch, Olivia gathered her courage. "Yates, I think it's time I told you why I left Boston." He glanced at her, then returned his eyes to the trail. "Only if you want to, I need to." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I was engaged to be married to Bernard Hartwell, son of my father's business partner. It was arranged when I was 16, to be fulfilled when I turned 18. A merger of families more than a love match. That's not uncommon, even out here." "No, but what happened next might be." She took a deep breath. "A month before the wedding, my father died suddenly. Heart failure, the doctor said. I was devastated, but Bernard and his father insisted the wedding proceed as planned. Then I discovered certain discrepancies in my father's ledgers." Yates remained silent, giving her space to continue. "The Hartwells had been embezzling from our shipping company for years. My father must have discovered it shortly before his death. I believe they poisoned him, though I couldn't prove it." Her voice caught. "When I confronted Bernard, he He changed, showed his true nature. He locked me in my room, said the wedding would proceed, and afterward, if I mentioned my delusions again, he'd have me committed to an asylum. Jesus, Yates muttered. I escaped with help from our housekeeper. Took what little money I could access and fled west. But somewhere in Missouri, I was robbed of almost everything. By the time I reached Wyoming, I had nothing left but the clothes on my back. She looked at him. The mail-order bride service seemed my only option. I never expected. I never thought anyone would want me in that state. Yates was quiet for so long that Olivia feared she'd said too much. Finally, he spoke. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until the day she died. Then he started on me. I left home at 15, worked every job you can imagine. Cowhand miner scout, saved every penny until I could buy my first piece of land. He nodded toward the horizon where their ranch lay. Built all this because I swore I'd never be at anyone's mercy again. Never thought much about sharing it until he broke off, shaking his head. Until. Olivia prompted. His eyes, when they met hers, held something she couldn't name. Until I saw a woman standing tall despite everything being against her. Made me think maybe there was someone worth making room for after all. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Olivia. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the stirring of hope, fragile as a spring bud, but persistent. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, the distance between them seemed less vast. Not gone, but bridgeable. A possibility neither had dared consider beginning to take shape in the quiet spaces between words. As summer settled over Quinn's Crossing, Olivia found herself settling too. The nightmares that had plagued her since leaving Boston gradually subsided. The flinch that accompanied unexpected movements or sounds diminished. She began to feel safe in a way she hadn't since her father's death. Yates seemed to unfold in her presence as well. His taciturn nature gave way to occasional stories shared over dinner, tales of cattle drives and winter storms, of the characters he'd encountered in his years building his ranch. He even laughed sometimes, the sound rusty as if from disuse but genuine. Isaac, who had initially watched their unusual marriage with obvious skepticism, now tipped his hat respectfully whenever he saw Olivia. She'd earned his loyalty the day she'd ridden out to the north pasture during a sudden thunderstorm, bringing food and dry clothes for the men working in the downpour. Mrs. Quinn, he'd said afterward, water still dripping from his slicker, you're nothing like what folks in town said you'd be. And what did they say I'd be, Isaac? She'd asked, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. Begging your pardon, madam, but they figured you for a city woman who'd run at the first sign of hardship, or worse, a con artist after the boss's land, she'd smiled. And what do you think now? I think the boss knew exactly what he was doing when he signed that contract. The memory of that conversation warmed her as she worked in the small garden she'd started behind the house. The Wyoming soil was challenging, but under her care, vegetables and herbs had begun to flourish. She was on her knees, pulling weeds, when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 riders approached the house, none of them Yates or Isaac, who had gone to help a neighboring ranch with their branding. Olivia stood, brushing soil from her hands, wariness creeping up her spine. As they drew closer, she recognized Frank Miller, the barber who had mocked Yates on the day of the auction. With him rode the banker, Whitfield, and a third man she didn't know, expensively dressed despite the dust of travel. Mrs. Quinn, Miller called, reining in his horse. Is your husband about? Mr. Quinn is helping the Johnsons today, she replied, keeping her voice even. I expect him back by sundown. Is there something I can help you with? The men exchanged glances and Whitfield spoke. This is Mr. Harold Mercer from the railroad. He has a proposition that might interest Quinn. Mercer tipped his hat, his pale eyes assessing her with cool calculation. Madam, the Western Pacific is planning a spur line through this territory. We're buying up land rights for the route. Olivia's grip tightened on the garden trowel she still held. I see, and this concerns Quinn's Crossing. How exactly? Your husband's land is directly in our planned route, Whitfield explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Mercer is prepared to make a very generous offer. How fortunate that you found us then, Olivia said. Though I'm curious why you're approaching us now with my husband away rather than coming to town when he's there every Saturday for supplies. Miller shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, but Mercer's smile remained fixed. "Simply a matter of timing, Mrs. Quinn. I'm only passing through briefly. Perhaps we could wait for your husband's return." "I'm afraid that won't be possible today," she replied. "As I said, he won't be back until evening, and I couldn't possibly presume to speak for him in business matters." "Perhaps you could leave your offer in writing, and he can consider it when he returns." Mercer's eyes hardened slightly. "This is a time-sensitive opportunity, Mrs. Quinn. The railroad can't wait indefinitely for decisions." "Nor can my husband make decisions without full information," she countered. "If your offer is truly as generous as Mr. Whitfield suggests, surely it can wait for proper consideration." The banker leaned forward in his saddle. "Mrs. Quinn, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. The railroad means progress for Redemption Springs. Those who cooperate will prosper, those who don't." The threat hung unspoken in the air. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Whitfield," Olivia said, her voice cool, "and I'll be sure to relay your message to my husband. Good day, gentlemen." She turned and walked steadily back to the house, her heart pounding despite her outward calm. Behind her, she heard muttered conversation before the sound of horses moving away. From the window, she watched them ride off, then sank into a kitchen chair. Something about the encounter left her deeply unsettled. The land meant everything to Yates, she knew that, without him having to say it. And these men had deliberately come when he was away, hoping to pressure her instead. When Yates returned that evening, dust-covered and weary from a day of branding cattle, Olivia had dinner waiting and the house tidy. She waited until he'd eaten and settled in his chair by the fire before telling him about the visitors. His expression darkened as she recounted the conversation. "Mercer, you said, I've heard rumors about him. Railroad man who doesn't mind cutting corners to get what he wants." "They seemed very eager to speak with you," Olivia said. "Almost too eager." Yates nodded slowly. "The Johnson place got a similar visit last week. Said the offer wasn't nearly as generous as advertised." He glanced at her. "You did right sending them away." "I didn't feel right making any response on your behalf." "Our behalf," he corrected quietly. The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. "What will you do?" she asked finally. He stared into the fire. "This land isn't for sale, not to the railroad, not to anyone." His gaze shifted to her. "Unless you feel differently. Life might be easier in town with the money from a sale, more like what you're used to." "No," she said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "This is home now." The smile that spread across his face made something flutter in her chest. "Yes, it is." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, Olivia realized how quickly Quinn's Crossing had indeed become home, and how thoroughly Yates Quinn had worked his way into her heart with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness. It was a realization as terrifying as it was exhilarating, because despite the paper that bound them legally, they remained in many ways strangers, and she had no idea if what she was beginning to feel could ever be returned. The railroad matter didn't end with that visit. Over the next weeks, Olivia noticed increased activity in the town whenever she went in for supplies. New faces appeared, men with the hard eyes of those who calculated worth in dollars rather than value. Whitfield seemed to be at the center of it all, holding meetings in the back room of the saloon. Yates heard similar reports from other ranchers. The railroad was buying land throughout the territory, sometimes at fair prices, sometimes through methods less savory. Those who refused found themselves facing sudden problems: water rights disputed, cattle mysteriously scattered, even a barn fire at the Peterson place that everyone knew wasn't an accident. "They're trying to scare us into selling," Yates told Olivia one evening as they sat on the porch. The summer was waning, the evenings growing cooler, but this land was built with stubborn, "It'll take more than threats to make me leave it." "What if the threats become more than threats?" Olivia asked. The concern she felt for him surprised her with its intensity. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. It was the first time he'd touched her so deliberately, outside of helping her into the wagon or steadying her on uneven ground. "I've faced worse odds," he said, "and now I've got more reason than ever to stand my ground." His eyes held hers, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a barrier dissolving, a possibility emerging. Olivia's breath caught as he leaned toward her, his intent clear. But before his lips could meet hers, the sound of approaching horses shattered the stillness. Yates was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Get inside," he told Olivia, his voice hard, "and bring my rifle." She hurried to comply, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see riders approaching, at least 5 of them. In the fading light, she recognized Mercer at the lead. The rifle was where Yates always kept it, loaded and ready. She grabbed it and returned to the porch, staying in the doorway as Yates had instructed. "Quinn," Mercer called as they reined in their horses, "we need to talk." "Nothing to talk about, Mercer," Yates replied, his stance relaxed but alert. "My land isn't for sale, not today, not tomorrow. That's not why we're here." The railroad man dismounted, followed by his companions, rough-looking men whose hands stayed suspiciously close to their weapons. "There's been some trouble with your water rights." "My water rights are solid, deeded with the property." Mercer produced a document from his coat. "Not according to this survey. Seems the boundary line of your property doesn't include the headwaters of the creek that runs through your land. That water belongs to a parcel recently purchased by the Western Pacific Railroad." "That's a lie," Yates said flatly, "and you know it. It's all legal, Quinn, signed by Judge Harmon himself." Mercer smiled thinly. "Of course the railroad is prepared to be reasonable. We could work out a water use agreement, or revisit our offer for your entire property, though I'm afraid recent assessments have reduced its value, what with the water situation and all." Olivia stepped forward, the rifle steady in her hands. "My husband said the land isn't for sale, Mr. Mercer." "I believe that settles the matter." The railroad man's eyes narrowed as they shifted to her. "Mrs. Quinn, I had hoped you might be the reasonable one in this partnership. I assure you, Mr. Mercer, when it comes to our home, my husband and I are in complete agreement." One of Mercer's men muttered something, hand drifting to his gun. Instantly, the tension ratcheted higher. Yates shifted slightly, placing himself more directly between the men and Olivia. "You've delivered your message," he said. "Now I suggest you leave my property before this turns into something none of us wants." For a long moment, Mercer stared at them, calculation clear in his pale eyes. Then he nodded. "We'll be in touch, Quinn. This matter isn't settled." As they rode away, Olivia's knees threatened to buckle. Yates took the rifle from her trembling hands and set it aside before leading her back to the porch. "You've got steady nerves," he said, an odd note of pride in his voice. "Not as steady as they looked," she admitted. "Yates, what are we going to do?" "If they really have manipulated the water rights, they haven't," he said firmly. "My deed is clear, but that won't stop them from making trouble. Mercer's playing a game, trying to pressure us into selling before we can fight the false claim. Can we fight it? We can and will." He looked out at the darkening land, his jaw set. "First thing tomorrow, I'm riding to Cheyenne to see the Territorial Land Office. The original surveys will be on file there." "I'm coming with you," Olivia said, the decision made before she even realized she was making it. Yates turned to her, surprise evident on his face. "It's a 3-day ride each way, rough country." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered. "And I won't stay here alone while you're gone, worrying every minute that Mercer's men might return." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll leave at first light. I'll have Isaac stay to watch the place." That night, as Olivia packed provisions for their journey, she reflected on how thoroughly her life had changed in the months since arriving in Redemption Springs. The woman who had stepped off the stage in ragged clothes, weak with hunger and fear, would hardly recognize the woman she had become, one who could stand on a porch with a rifle, facing down railroad men, alongside a husband who had started as a stranger but was becoming something much more. Their journey to Cheyenne was arduous, but not unpleasant. Yates set a pace that challenged Olivia without exhausting her, and the hours in the saddle gave them time to talk in ways they hadn't before. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, the Hereford cattle he wanted to introduce to improve his stock, the apple orchard he'd tried to start 3 times without success. In turn, she shared memories of her life before her father's shipping business that had taken him around the world, returning with stories and small treasures, the books she'd loved, the music she missed. "I had a piano once," she told him as they made camp on the second night. "My father brought it back from Europe when I was 12. I practiced every day until I left Boston." Yates fed another stick to their small fire. Do you miss it? That life, parts of it, she admitted, but not as much as I would have expected. She looked across the fire at him, at the way the flames gilded his features. I've found unexpected happiness here. His eyes met hers, holding something that made her heart quicken. Have you? Yes, she said simply. They reached Cheyenne the following afternoon, dusty and saddle sore but determined. The Territorial Land Office was a modest building near the courthouse, staffed by a harried clerk who seemed less than enthusiastic about their request to see the original survey maps. Those records are kept secure, he informed them, barely looking up from his ledger. Not available for public viewing without proper authorization. This is a matter of disputed water rights, Yates explained. The Western Pacific Railroad is claiming ownership of water that runs through my property. At the mention of the railroad, the clerk's demeanor shifted subtly. I see. Well, even so, I'd need authorization from Judge Harmon to release those records. The same Judge Harmon who signed the document giving the railroad claim to my water? Yates asked, his voice hardening. The clerk finally looked up, nervous eyes darting between them. I'm afraid I can't help you without proper. Perhaps I can clarify our situation, Olivia interrupted, stepping forward. She had changed into her best dress for this visit, a modest but well-made blue calico that emphasized her slender figure. My husband and I have traveled 3 days to resolve this matter. We're prepared to wait for Judge Harmon's authorization if necessary, but I wonder if you might at least confirm whether the original survey exists. The clerk hesitated, clearly torn between caution and the natural inclination to be helpful to a lady in distress. I suppose I could check the index. That would be most kind, Olivia said with a smile that had once charmed Boston society. As the clerk shuffled to a cabinet at the back of the office, Yates raised an eyebrow at her. You're good at that, he murmured. At what? Getting people to do what you want without them realizing they're being managed. She suppressed a smile. A skill my mother insisted every young lady should cultivate. The clerk returned with a ledger, which he consulted with evident reluctance. The original survey for the property registered to Yates Quinn, Quinn's Crossing, was filed in 1869. It does appear to include water rights to all streams originating on or flowing through the property. Yates leaned forward. And has there been any amendment to that survey? Any new filing? The clerk ran a finger down the page. There's a notation here. A resurvey request filed 3 weeks ago by Harold Mercer on behalf of Western Pacific Railroad, approved by Judge Harmon, he frowned. But the actual resurvey document isn't logged as received. Because it doesn't exist, Yates said flatly. Mercer's claiming a resurvey that hasn't happened. The clerk looked up, alarm evident on his face. Sir, I couldn't possibly comment on— No, of course not, Olivia interjected smoothly. We appreciate your help in confirming the original survey's existence. Is there someone else who might be able to resolve this discrepancy? Perhaps the territorial surveyor. Relief washed over the clerk's face. Yes, Mr. Abernathy would be the one to consult. His office is 2 doors down, but I should warn you, he's very busy and doesn't take unscheduled appointments. We'll take our chances, Yates said, already turning toward the door. Thank you for your assistance. Outside, he took Olivia's elbow, guiding her along the boardwalk. Mercer's manipulating the system, he muttered. Filing paperwork to make it look like the resurvey is in progress when it hasn't even been done. Can the territorial surveyor help us, if he's honest? The doubt in Yates' voice suggested he wasn't optimistic on that front. The territorial surveyor's office was more impressive than the land office, larger, with better furniture and several clerks working at desks. A young man intercepted them as they entered. May I help you? We need to speak with Mr. Abernathy, Yates said. Regarding a disputed water rights claim, the clerk shook his head. I'm afraid Mr. Abernathy is fully booked today. You'll need to make an appointment for next week. Next week will be too late, Olivia said. Please, this is urgent. We've traveled 3 days to resolve this matter. I'm sorry, madam, but is there a problem, Collins? A deep voice interrupted from a doorway at the back of the office. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles surveyed them with interest. Mr. Abernathy, the clerk said, these people want to discuss a water rights issue, but you don't have any appointments available. Indeed, the surveyor studied them. And you are, Yates Quinn. This is my wife, Olivia. We own a ranch near Redemption Springs. Yates stepped forward, offering his hand, which Abernathy shook firmly. The Western Pacific Railroad is claiming our water rights based on a resurvey that we believe hasn't actually been conducted. Abernathy's eyebrows rose. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Quinn. Perhaps you'd better come into my office. He turned to his clerk. Hold my other appointments for half an hour, Collins. Once seated in Abernathy's well-appointed office, Yates explained the situation succinctly: the original water rights, Mercer's visit, and what they'd learned at the land office. The surveyor listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When Yates finished, Abernathy removed his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief. Unfortunately, Mr. Quinn, your story is becoming all too familiar. The Western Pacific has been aggressive in its acquisition of rights-of-way throughout the territory. Most of it is legal, if not particularly ethical. But claiming a resurvey that hasn't happened isn't legal, Olivia pointed out. No, it's not, Abernathy agreed. And if what you say is true, it's fraud. He replaced his spectacles. The difficulty is proving it. Judge Harmon has considerable influence in the territory, and he's known to be sympathetic to the railroad's interests. So you're saying there's nothing we can do? Yates asked, frustration evident in his voice. Abernathy held up a hand. I didn't say that. As territorial surveyor, I have the authority to review and certify all surveys. No claim based on a resurvey is valid until I've signed off on it. Hope flickered. And have you signed off on a resurvey of Quinn's Crossing? I have not. Nor has any of my staff conducted such a survey. Abernathy's expression was grim. Which means someone is attempting to circumvent my office. That concerns me greatly, both professionally and as a citizen who believes in the rule of law. He rose and went to a large cabinet filled with maps. After a moment's search, he pulled out a rolled document and spread it on his desk. This is the original survey of your property, Mr. Quinn. As you can see, it clearly includes all water rights to streams originating on or passing through your land. Yates and Olivia leaned forward to examine the map, relief washing over them at the official confirmation. I'm prepared to issue a formal statement reaffirming these boundaries and water rights, Abernathy continued. It won't stop the railroad from trying other tactics, but it will invalidate this particular claim. Thank you, Yates said, genuine gratitude in his voice. That's more than we hoped for. Abernathy nodded, rolling the map and returning it to its place. I'll have my clerk prepare the document immediately. You can collect it before you leave today. His expression turned serious. But I would advise caution, Mr. Quinn. The Western Pacific doesn't take defeat gracefully, and Judge Harmon won't appreciate having his authority questioned, even indirectly. We understand the risks, Olivia said, but this is our home. We can't simply surrender it. No, the surveyor agreed, his eyes moving between them with newfound respect. I suppose you can't. Armed with Abernathy's official statement, Yates and Olivia spent the night in Cheyenne before beginning the journey back to Quinn's Crossing. The return trip seemed shorter somehow, buoyed by their success and the growing ease between them. On the second night, as they made camp beside a clear stream, Yates unpacked their provisions while Olivia gathered wood for a fire. The simple domesticity of the task, performed under the vast Wyoming sky, filled her with unexpected contentment. You're smiling, Yates observed as she returned with an armful of kindling. Am I? She set the wood down and brushed off her hands. I suppose I am, despite everything I feel. Happy, he moved closer, his eyes intent on her face. Despite everything, the railroad trouble, the long journey, the uncertainty ahead. She gestured around them, sleeping on the ground in the middle of nowhere. Some might say especially in the middle of nowhere, he said softly. Away from towns and railroads and all the complications they bring. Yes, she agreed, looking up at him, especially here. The space between them seemed charged with possibility. Yates reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Olivia, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. When he kissed her, it was tender, at first a question rather than a demand. But as she responded, her arms circling his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and vital. It was an answer to a question neither had fully articulated, a bridge across the final distance that had separated them. Later, as they lay wrapped in blankets beside the fire, her head on his chest and his arms around her, Yates spoke into the darkness. "I never expected this. When I signed that contract in Redemption Springs, I thought I was doing a good deed, maybe getting a housekeeper in the bargain." He paused. "I never thought I'd find." "What?" she prompted when he didn't continue. "Everything," he said simply. "I never thought I'd find everything." The words echoed in her heart, perfect in their honesty. Because somehow, against all odds, that's what they had found in each other. They returned to Quinn's Crossing to find Isaac anxiously awaiting their arrival. The railroad men had returned twice during their absence, growing more threatening each time, but the ranch was intact, the cattle undisturbed. "I told them you'd gone to straighten out the water rights mess," Isaac reported. "They didn't like that much." "I imagine not," Yates said grimly. He handed Isaac the document from Abernathy. "This should put an end to that particular scheme, but keep your eyes open. They'll try something else." That prediction proved accurate sooner than any of them anticipated. 3 days after their return, Olivia was working in her garden when she noticed a strange haze on the horizon. "Yates," she called, standing to get a better view. "Is that smoke?" He emerged from the barn, shading his eyes to look in the direction she pointed. "Damn," he muttered. "That's a grass fire, and the wind's bringing it this way." Isaac appeared from the corral, his face grim. "Boss, that fire didn't start by itself, not after last night's rain." Yates nodded, his expression hardening. "Mercer, he's decided if he can't have the ranch, nobody will." He turned to Olivia. "Get inside and gather anything important, documents, valuables, just in case." "In case of what?" she asked, though she feared she knew the answer. "In case we can't stop it from reaching the house." As Olivia hurried to comply, Yates and Isaac began preparations to fight the approaching fire. They filled barrels with water from the well, soaked blankets and sacks, and prepared to create a firebreak. From the house, Olivia could see the smoke growing thicker, the glow of flames visible now beneath it. Fear clutched at her throat. She had lost so much already: her father, her home in Boston, her sense of security. The thought of losing this new life, this place where she had finally found belonging, was unbearable. But fear wouldn't save Quinn's Crossing. Action might. Abandoning the task of gathering valuables, Olivia ran to the kitchen and began filling every container she could find with water. She soaked towels and tablecloths, then carried them outside to where Yates and Isaac were working frantically to clear a strip of earth around the ranch buildings. "What can I do?" she called over the growing roar of the approaching fire. Yates looked up, sweat streaming down his dirt-smudged face. "Get back inside. It's too dangerous out here." "I'm not hiding while you two fight this alone," she retorted, already moving to help Isaac with the shovel he was using to turn over soil. The foreman cast her a surprised glance, then nodded in approval. "More hands make light work, boss," he told Yates, "and we need all the hands we can get right now." For the next hour they worked without rest, racing against the wind-driven flames. The fire moved faster than Olivia would have believed possible, consuming the dry grass in greedy gulps. The heat became intense, the smoke choking. But they persisted, widening the firebreak, wetting down the buildings, preparing to make a stand. When the fire reached the edge of their cleared perimeter, it was like facing a living enemy. Flames leapt and snatched, seeking any fuel they could find. Embers carried on the wind landed on the barn roof, starting small blazes that Yates and Isaac rushed to extinguish while Olivia continued to wet down the main house. Through it all, she never considered retreat. This was her home now, not just the buildings, but the land itself. The place where she had found strength she never knew she possessed, and love she had stopped believing existed. She would fight for it with everything she had, and fight they did, the three of them against nature weaponized by human malice. Hours blurred in a haze of heat, smoke, and exhaustion. Olivia's arms ached from carrying water, her lungs burned from the acrid air, but she never faltered. As dusk fell, the wind shifted a small mercy that turned the main force of the fire away from the ranch buildings. But the danger wasn't over. Spot fires continued to erupt as embers flew, requiring constant vigilance. It was well past midnight when they finally gained the upper hand. The main fire had moved on, leaving a blackened landscape in its wake. The ranch buildings stood scorched but intact. The cattle, which Isaac had driven to the creek at the first sign of fire, were safe. Olivia sank to her knees in the yard, too exhausted to stand any longer. Her dress was ruined, her hands blistered, her face streaked with soot. She had never been so tired in her life, or so proud. Yates found her there and knelt beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "Are you all right?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly despite their filthy, sweat-soaked condition. "You were amazing," he murmured into her hair. "I've never seen anything like it. We saved it," she whispered. "Our home." "Yes." He drew back to look at her, and in his eyes she saw a reverence that took her breath away. "You called it our home. It is." She touched his smoke-blackened face. "Where you are is my home now, Yates Quinn. Whether it's this ranch or somewhere else entirely." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of smoke and salt and a promise that transcended words. When they finally broke apart, Isaac was watching them with a tired grin. "Guess I'll check on the cattle one more time," he said, tipping his hat as he moved away to give them privacy. Yates helped Olivia to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. "Come on, let's get cleaned up and rest. Tomorrow will bring its own battles." The next morning revealed the full extent of the fire's damage. A third of their grazing land was burned, though the grass would return with the next rain. The barn needed repairs where embers had burned through in places, but the structure was sound. Most importantly, they had lost no cattle and the house was undamaged. As they surveyed the scene, Olivia felt Yates tense beside her. Following his gaze, she saw riders approaching a sizable group, at least a dozen men. "Get inside," Yates said, his voice tight. "If anything happens to me, there's a shotgun under our bed and a box of shells in the drawer beside it." "I'm staying with you," she replied, her hand finding his. Before he could argue, the riders drew close enough to recognize. It wasn't Mercer and his men, as they had feared. It was their neighbors, the Johnsons, the Petersons, and half a dozen other ranching families from the surrounding area. "Quinn," called out Johnson as they reined in their horses. "We saw the fire from our place, came as soon as we could to help, but looks like you managed without us." "Barely," Yates admitted. "We appreciate you coming all the same." Peterson dismounted, his expression grim. "It wasn't just your place. 3 other ranches got hit last night, all of us who have refused to sell to the railroad." Murmurs of anger ran through the group. These were hard-working people. Olivia realized men and women who had carved lives out of the unforgiving Wyoming landscape through sheer determination. The same determination now evident in their faces as they confronted this new threat. "Mercer's gone too far," Johnson declared. "Setting fires that could kill people isn't business, it's murder." "We need to take this to the sheriff," one of the other ranchers suggested. Peterson snorted. "Sheriff's in the railroad's pocket. You think he'll move against Mercer?" "Then we move against Mercer ourselves," said another man, his hand dropping to his gun. "No," Olivia spoke up, stepping forward. All eyes turned to her, this woman they had once mocked as a ragged bride, now standing tall despite her soot-stained dress and exhaustion. "Violence will only give them an excuse to bring in more men, maybe even troops. We need to be smarter." Yates squeezed her hand in support. "Mrs. Quinn is right. Mercer's power comes from the railroad and from making deals with people like Whitfield. We need to show the town what kind of man they're in business with." "How do we do that?" Johnson asked. "Half the merchants in Redemption Springs are already taking railroad money." "Not all of them," Olivia said, an idea taking shape. "And not all of them know what Mercer is willing to do to get his way." By midday, their plan was in motion. Runners were sent to every ranch and homestead within 20 miles, carrying a simple message: "Meet at Quinn's Crossing tomorrow at noon. Bring evidence of any railroad wrongdoing." Yates was skeptical. "You really think people will come forward? Most folks are scared to cross the railroad." "They're more scared of losing everything they've worked for," Olivia countered. "And they're angry. We just need to give that anger direction." The next day, the yard of Quinn's Crossing filled with people, not just ranchers, but townsfolk as well. The Petersons' teenage son had distributed notices in Redemption Springs, and curiosity, if nothing else, had drawn many to see what was happening. From the porch of their home, Olivia looked out at the gathered crowd and felt a surge of determination. These were her neighbors now, her community. and they deserved better than to be bullied by men like Mercer and Whitfield. Yates stepped up beside her, clean-shaven and dressed in his best shirt. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, smoothing the front of her one remaining good dress. "As I'll ever be." Together, they walked out to address the crowd. Conversations hushed as people noticed them, turning expectant faces their way. "Thank you all for coming," Yates began, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "Most of you know by now that several ranches, including Quinn's Crossing, were deliberately set afire 2 nights ago. What you may not know is that every ranch targeted has something in common: we all refuse to sell our land to the Western Pacific Railroad." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Olivia noticed Whitfield standing at the back, his face tight with displeasure. "Good, let him report back to Mercer." "This isn't just about our land," Yates continued. "It's about the future of Redemption Springs itself. The railroad promises progress and prosperity, but at what cost? And who will that prosperity benefit?" "The railroad means jobs," someone called from the crowd, "and better prices for our goods." "Yes," Olivia stepped forward. "The railroad can bring benefits. No one disputes that, but not when it comes at the expense of honest people's livelihoods, not when it uses intimidation and fraud to take what it wants." She described their discovery in Cheyenne, the fraudulent water rights claim, the document from the territorial surveyor confirming the deceit. As she spoke, others in the crowd began to nod, some calling out their own experiences with railroad tactics. "They threatened to run the line around our town entirely if we didn't sell them the right-of-way at their price," said the owner of the general store. "Told me they'd build a competing saloon across from mine if I didn't support them at the town meeting," added another man. One by one, people stepped forward with their stories. Not just ranchers, but shopkeepers, the blacksmith, even the town's doctor. The picture that emerged was clear. The Western Pacific had been systematically manipulating and intimidating the entire community. "This isn't progress," Yates declared when the testimonies finally ended. "It's theft wrapped in promises, and it stops now." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd, growing in strength until it became a chorus of voices unified in purpose. "What do we do?" Johnson called out. "How do we stop them?" "Together," Olivia answered simply. "We stand together." And as she looked out at the determined faces before her, these people who had once laughed at the ragged bride Yates Quinn had brought home, she knew they would indeed stand together. The railroad had underestimated this community's resilience, just as Redemption Springs had underestimated her. In the days that followed, the residents of Redemption Springs organized as they never had before. A delegation, led by Yates and including the town's most respected citizens, traveled to Cheyenne to present their evidence to the territorial governor. They returned with assurances of an investigation into the Western Pacific's practices, and more importantly, a directive from the governor prohibiting any construction until that investigation was complete. Mercer disappeared from Redemption Springs overnight, taking with him the rougher elements he had imported. Whitfield, facing the community's unified disapproval, found his banking business suddenly struggling as people withdrew their savings and took their business elsewhere. The railroad eventually did come to Wyoming territory, but on terms negotiated fairly with landowners and communities. Quinn's Crossing remained intact, yielding only a small corner of land for the right-of-way, in exchange for fair compensation and guaranteed water rights. As for Olivia and Yates, the crisis had cemented what was already growing between them, a partnership of equals, founded on respect and deepening daily into the kind of love that neither had expected to find. One evening, almost a year to the day since Olivia had arrived in Redemption Springs, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I was in town today," Olivia said, her head resting against Yates' shoulder. "Mrs. Whitfield actually smiled at me, said my new hat was quite becoming." Yates chuckled. "Miracles never cease. It's strange to think how everything has changed. A year ago I was running for my life with nothing but the clothes on my back, and now," she smiled up at him, "now I have everything that matters." He kissed her softly, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her belly where their child grew. "I told them, didn't I, that day in town when they all laughed?" "Told them what?" "That they'd watch you become my queen." His eyes held a mixture of pride and wonder as they moved over her face. "And you have, Queen of Quinn's Crossing, Queen of my heart." "Such pretty words from a man who barely spoke when I first met him," she teased. "You changed me," he said simply. "For the better, I hope." "We changed each other," she corrected, taking his hand and placing it more firmly against her abdomen where their baby had just kicked. "And we'll keep changing, growing." As darkness settled over the land they had fought for and won, Olivia reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. The society girl from Boston would never have imagined finding happiness on a Wyoming ranch with a taciturn cowboy who had purchased her contract when she was at her lowest point. But life, she had learned, rarely followed the expected path. Sometimes it led you through fire and hardship to places you never thought you'd go. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those unexpected journeys led you home. When their child was born the following spring, a daughter with her father's determined chin and her mother's bright eyes, they named her Hope. A fitting name, Olivia thought, for a child born of a union that had begun with little more than that. And as redemption springs grew around the railroad that had finally arrived, the story of how Yates Quinn had bought a bride in rags and made her his queen became part of local legend. But only Olivia and Yates knew the full truth of it, how two wounded souls had found in each other not just safety or companionship, but the rare and precious gift of a love that had transformed them both. 5 years later, Quinn's Crossing had flourished into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. The apple orchard that Yates had tried repeatedly to establish had finally taken root under Olivia's careful tending. The Hereford cattle he had dreamed of now grazed on the rolling hills, their red and white coats distinctive against the green grass, and their family had grown. Hope, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's quiet determination and her mother's quick mind, had been joined by a brother, Thomas, who at 3 was already showing signs of becoming as capable a horseman as his father. Redemption Springs itself had changed as well. The railroad that had once threatened to divide the community had instead helped it prosper, but on the terms set by the people rather than outside interests. Whitfield had eventually sold his bank and moved east, unable to recover from the scandal of his association with Mercer's schemes. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Isaac's watchful eye, the foreman having appointed himself unofficial uncle to the Quinn offspring, Yates found Olivia in the garden she had expanded year by year. She was picking the season's first tomatoes, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the setting sun. "You've worked wonders here," he said, surveying the neat rows of vegetables and herbs. "Like everything you touch." She straightened, smiling at the compliment. Time had only enhanced her beauty, adding confidence and contentment to features that had once been strained with fear and uncertainty. "It helps to have good soil to work with," she replied, setting her basket aside to come to him. He took her hands in his, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "We've built something good here, haven't we? Something that will last." "Yes," she agreed, leaning into him as his arms encircled her waist. "Something that will outlive us both." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, pure and uninhibited. Olivia thought of the journey that had brought her here, the losses and struggles, the fear and uncertainty. None of it seemed to matter now in the face of what she had gained. "Do you ever think about that day?" Yates asked, as if reading her thoughts. "When I signed that contract in town, sometimes," she admitted, "it seems like another lifetime." "I knew, you know," he said softly. "Even then, with you standing there in rags, looking like you might collapse any moment. I knew there was something special about you. Is that why you did it? Why you defied the whole town to claim me?" He considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Partly. But mostly I couldn't stand seeing you up there, being judged and found wanting by people who didn't know the first thing about you, about what you might be capable of." "And now," she asked, a smile playing at her lips, "do you think they know?" Yates laughed, the sound rich and full in a way it hadn't been when they first met. "Now they don't dare underestimate Olivia Quinn." As if to emphasize his point, the children came running toward them, Hope's dark braids flying behind her, little Thomas struggling to keep up on shorter legs. "Mama, Papa," Hope called. Uncle Isaac says there's pie for dessert. Is it true? It might be, Olivia confirmed, bending to catch Thomas as he barreled into her skirts. If certain young people have eaten all their dinner first. We will, Hope promised solemnly. Come on, Tommy. Race you to the house. As the children darted away, Yates pulled Olivia close again. You did become my queen, you know, he said softly. Every day in ways I never imagined possible. And you, she replied, stretching up to kiss him, became the king I never knew I was waiting for. Together, hand in hand, they walked toward their home, where dinner waited and children's laughter filled the rooms that had once been silent and empty. Behind them, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had fought for in one Quinn's Crossing, the kingdom they had built together out of nothing more than hope, determination, and a love that had defied all expectations.